Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I would like to talk about attack and defense. We'll see positions when one side is attacking, and the question will be how to follow up. We'll see other examples where there will be a crossroad on how to defend. Let's start with our first example. Here we go. In this position, we can clearly see that primarily white is on the attack because the black king is pretty exposed, missing the f7 and g7 pawns from its defense. The only consolation for black may be that there aren't that many pieces left on the board. However, two of the strongest pieces for white are still on the board, the queen and the rook. So obviously, white needs to focus on how to coordinate those two major pieces towards the attack. Try to first think and see what you would do if you would be playing white right here. On the material scale, we can see that black is a pawn ahead, which would be, of course, very significant if black would be able to trade either the pair of rooks or the pair of queens. However, given the fact that it's white's turn, if white continues correctly, black will never get a chance to do that. Right now, white has an option to immediately capture the pawn back on e6, which certainly looks like a very natural move and not a bad one either. However, that would give black the opportunity to take the initiative over and check white with the queen on c5. I mean, rook captures and then queen c5 check. And then black will be able to give a number of further checks depending on where the white king moves to and be just fine. White will be too slow in further progressing their attack. Therefore, this is a key moment where white needs to play aggressively, not leaving black the time to escape or get counterplay. Well, that's kind of a giveaway, a hint, saying that the first move should be a check. A check certainly would limit black's options. Now, white has a number of reasonable looking checks, two with the queen on f3 or f4, or with the rook on f1. We can see that the queen is quite well positioned on an open file, attacking squares near the black king. So it's just logical to see if there is another piece that we can bring to the attack. However, in this case, this pretty much requires precise calculation, not very long or deep, but precise. Because if the move that we're about to see would not lead to immediate result, then the next best thing would be still to capture the pawn. For example, compared to queen f4, capturing the pawn on e6 is still better. However, not compared to the ideal move, which is to play rook f1 check. Now the chase begins. If black does not want to lose the queen immediately, he better moves out of the check. And now we have to follow up with another forceful move, a check with the queen on g8. Black again doesn't have much of a choice, but move the king to d7. And now that the black king and queen are on the same rank, white is ready to pin and not allow the black queen to start giving any kind of checks. Now, black queen is pinned, and therefore it's lost. White has an overwhelming advantage. Let's go on to our second example. Here we go. This is quite a fascinating position where white has just sacrificed the rook on h7. Whenever your opponent makes such a scary-looking move, a sacrifice, there are two things to do. First of all, see what happens if you accept the sacrifice without any prejudice, without being scared that, oh, if my opponent sacrificed something, he or she surely knows what they are doing. It may be the case, but you certainly shouldn't blindly believe your opponent, even if your opponent is higher rated than you are. Check out the situation exactly in front of you and believe your own eyes, not anybody's rating or staring look even. In this case, as I said, first let's check out what happens if black captures the rook on h7. Is there an immediate follow-up for white to win the game? White planned to play queen h3 or queen h4 check. Now if the king goes to g7, indeed the combination works perfectly for white. Can you see the checkmate? Indeed, if king g7, check, king g8 and knight f6, and it's game over. So let's go back to the variation to see what happens if black, instead of making the blunder of king to g7, moves rather the king to g8. A much better move, obviously, because now the queen h6 move would not be with a tempo, with a check. On the other hand, if white would play knight f6 right away, the black king could simply run away through f8 and queen h8, king e7. Okay, let's go back and see what happens if white plays the better looking queen h6. Well, what is happening right now? White is about to checkmate with the knight f6. The first thing you'd look at, see if you can capture that knight straight out. Obviously, black cannot do that. The second thing you would look at, see if you can control the f6 square, so when and if the knight arrives there, you can capture it. Well, indeed, there is one such a move, namely to retreat the bishop to e7. However, it does not solve the problem, because after knight f6 and bishop takes, instead of the knight, now one of the white pawns comes to its place, threatening with a very devastating checkmate on g7. Let's go back again and see what else black may be able to do. And this is those difficult things to see sometimes from a distance, and most likely that's what black missed in the game when chose not to accept the sacrifice. Here is how black can save the game. Before you listen further, I suggest you stop for a moment and try to figure out on your own what is the only escape route. And that is to give back some of the huge material advantage that black already has. As we see, black has an extra rook and an extra bishop. So black is in good shape. So even if he gives up, let's say, a rook, but manages to get away from all these checkmate threats, the extra bishop will be a decisive material advantage for black. So rook g2 check is the beautiful move for black. The idea is not that difficult, actually. If king takes, now that we know what we're shooting for, primarily to get rid of that knight, bishop b7. Now that knight on e4 is pinned, therefore it cannot jump to f6, and black is about to capture the knight on e4, and then black is out of the water. But you may wonder, what will happen if white does not capture the rook on g2? Well, if the king goes left towards f1, obviously it's simple, bishop d3 check, and then captures the knight. But how about if the king hides in the corner? Now there is another elegant move accomplishing our goal. And that move is to play rook f2. Wow, what a move this is. First of all, the knight can capture the rook. Well, that's certainly true, but that would give black the time to recover, for example, play bishop back to f8 and chase white's queen back. But you may wonder, how about the same idea that we learned of a little while ago with knight f6 and then when rook take, pawn takes back and checkmate on g7? Well, the major difference is that even though Black here is giving up a more valuable piece than we did before in capturing the knight with the bishop. However, by having the bishop instead of the rook, Black is able to save the day by retreating the bishop to f8 and maintain a tremendous material advantage. Okay, let's go all the way back. Now that we know that Black safely could have and should have captured the rook on h7, let's see how the game itself continued. Black played instead bishop to b7, which is not a good choice if White continues correctly. Even though the most natural looking move is knight f6, it's not the best choice because it would allow the Black king to run away. It is significantly better for White to double up on the h-file, moving the queen to h3 or h4 as White continued in the actual game. Now, Black does not have the time to eliminate White's knight on e4 because of checkmate in 2 with starting with rook h8. So Black has no choice but start running, king f8. So the key question is how to continue the attack right now. Bringing the other rook from a1 to f1 is certainly a logical choice, but a bit too slow, giving Black the time to recover. The best way to continue is to play rook f7, sacrifice the rook again, trying to force Black to capture it, and therewith giving White extra time, bringing additional pieces to the attack. King captured back, and now came queen h7 check. If king f8, the white rook is ready to come to the game to f1, or after king e8, as the game continued, finally the white knight is able to jump in and with a check, forcing king g8, and now White is ready to checkmate in 2. Queen g8, king e7, and queen g7 checkmate. A very nice attack, but as we could see, the combination was flawed. So what's the moral of the story? Just because the opponent is attacking or sacrificing and seems to be confident, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's a correct attack or a correct sacrifice. Again, always try to get to the truths that you see with your own eyes and don't judge things by their appearance. In this case, Black should have accepted the sacrifice and then would have easily won the game. Let's move on to the next example. Here we go. In this position, it is White's turn. What do we see so far? Well, the first thing we can establish that there is a complete material equality. We also next need to notice that the white rook is under attack and so is the white knight on e5. The next thing we need to pay attention to is that the black king is a very opened up and delicate position, especially on the dark diagonal. If we could get a queen to f6 or in some cases to c3, it's almost a checkmate since the white rook is holding off the squares on the g-file. In the meantime, it's not so easy to see how to accomplish that without losing either the rook or knight. Well, I suggest try to work on that idea. How can we get our queen onto the diagonal to attack black's king successfully so it will result in either checkmate or significant material gain? Well, the beautiful answer here is to play knight f7 check, which is almost a checkmate if black couldn't capture it. But obviously black can capture it. And here is the important point. Regardless if black will capture it with the queen or the rook, the white queen will be ready to come to c3, and now that only one of the black major pieces are on the e-file, blocking on e5 doesn't help, unlike when the rook was still on e7 and black could have blocked on e5. So now black is in major trouble. It wouldn't be terribly different either if black captures with the queen and then comes queen c3, although it's not checkmate as quick as after rook takes, but black will end up losing the queen in any rate, giving white a very significant advantage. Let's move on. Here we are. In this position, we have an endgame with queen and two minor pieces each and even number of pawns. But at the moment, the white queen is under attack and so is the white knight on h7. There is only one move for white where white can save both of them. And white indeed played that move, playing queen to e3 check. And this is the critical moment of this endgame. Black has various options whether to move the king out of the check or block it. I suggest again you take your time and try to figure out which is the best option of those three. Let's start first with what happened in the game. Black responded by playing queen e7, blocking the check, probably in hopes that the queens will get traded, and then if white goes pawn hunting, capturing on b7, the white knight on h7 would be trapped after the g-pawn advances to g5. But first, we always need to look for the most forceful moves. And in this case, that is to play knight f6, check, using the fact that the black queen is in a pin, leaving black with only a single choice, king to f8. And now, queen h6 check, a second forceful move, leaving black again only with one single choice, blocking the check with the queen. And now, white can check with the knight on h7, and all of a sudden, the black king is forced to get away from the defense of the queen on g7, and therefore, white is winning the queen. Going back to the starting position after queen e3, now that we know that queen e7 is a losing mistake, which, by the way, black chose in the game, let's look for a better alternative. The next best option is to block with the bishop. However, the top choice is actually to move the king out to d7. However, the best option for black here is to move the king out to d7. That does not put anything in a pin, while still maintains the attack on white's knight on h7, and if the knight retreats, black is ready to launch another attack with queen a1 check, and then when the king moves out, the a2 pawn is falling as well. So the moral of the story is be very, very careful when you voluntarily move into a pin. And as so often, in this case, it was better to avoid getting into a pin. Let's move on to our next example. What do we see in this position? First of all, materially speaking, we're all even. We see that white has a far advanced passed pawn on g7. However, a pawn like that either can be the greatest treasure if it's becoming a queen, or it can easily be lost as it is surrounded by enemy pieces. In fact, black is immediately threatening that pawn. However, at the same time, we also need to recognize that the black king is in a very sensitive position. And yet another important element in the position is that the white queen is pinned. As we know, queens are the most valuable attacking pieces we can have. However, in this case, the queen cannot do much. It is pinned, and the best it can do is exchange for black's queen. However, white has a not very difficult tactic that can result in significant gain. Try to see what I mean. If you need a hint, the hint is it involves a fork. And the answer is to make a forceful move immediately. Rook h8 check. That forces the black king to capture the pawn, that same pawn we talked about that may get powerful or maybe lost. It got lost. However, white successfully forced the black king and queen into a forking position. So now the white knight arrives on h5, check, and then captures black's queen. Let's move on to our next example. Here we are. In this position, white has a visible attack on the g file and also the minor pieces, the white knight on e5 or the bishop on h5, are all participating in the attack. There is a potential for the white knight to appear on f7, which would almost be powerful if black wouldn't have two of his pieces controlling that square, the queen and the rook. The bishop on h5 aiding that same process. However, if immediately knight f7, rook takes. So therefore, white needs to improve the position just a bit more. White continued, Grandmaster Belyavsky, white, and Bareyev again with black, queen h4. Now black has serious difficulties. For example, if black responds with rook g7, trying to trade rooks, white indeed happily trades. Now if queen captures back, then it's almost smothered mate with knight f7, forcing black to give up the queen. Or if the king captures back, then white forces the king back to the corner with a check, and comes knight f7. Going back after queen h4, if black responds with bishop e8, trying to trade bishops, that will not work out well either, because white will trade the bishops and then use the pin that has been created on the h file with knight g6 check, and if king moves out, a discovered check with knight e7 at least wins the knight on g8 and more. And finally, the game continued after queen h4 with black playing knight f6. Now the problem was a very nice and fine move, bishop f7. This is a very powerful move which opens up the h-file. Therefore, white now threatens with the fork with knight g6 using the pin. On the other hand, if the black rook captures, that doesn't help either. Still, knight g6 does the job. A very nice end to a strong attack by Belyavsky. Let's move on and see the next example where things look a bit crazy, with a white king being all kind of naked with no pawns or pieces around it of its own color. So therefore there's a lot of potential danger. The good news is white is up a bishop, although black has sufficient material compensation for it in the 3 pawns on the queen side. The bottom line is, if it would be black's turn, things wouldn't be too bad for black, because black would have the momentum to continue with the attack against the lonely white king. However, it was white's turn, and white has a powerful move immediately to activate more pieces, before black would do so. We can see the white rook and bishop still undeveloped, so let's see if we can develop those pieces. The challenge is that if white moves the bishop out from f1, the rook on h1 will be lost. However, white does not care about that. The point is to get another piece into the attack near the black king. The correct move was bishop to c4. Now if black does not capture the rook, as he did in the game, but moves the queen to b4, natural move attacking the bishop, then white would follow up with queen h4, king g8, and black will suffer because of the queen on b4 being on an unprotected square, allowing white to now play bishop f7, winning black's queen. On the other hand, if the queen indeed captures the rook on h1, then white makes the simple bishop f7 move and threatens with queen g8 checkmate as well as queen h4. The game ended by black playing knight d7, and now it's checkmate. It's very important that when you are attacking with a piece or two, see if you can get more pieces aiding your attack. The more pieces can cooperate in an attack, the more dangerous an attack is. And now let's see the jewel of the week. Here we are. In this position, black seems to be fine having his queen. The problem is, he's not able to keep it much longer. Try to see if you can find a correct solution how white can win black's queen. The point is to recognize a potential discovery if the f2 pawn could advance with a check. And therefore, the answer is g5. If king captures or moves to e5, then f4. Or after king f5, the white bishop will give itself up, bishop e4, with the same idea. White has only one idea, to force the black king onto a square so that the white pawn from f2 could give a check. For example, if king f4, f takes e3. Or if king captures bishop, then f3, and so on. I hope you enjoyed this beautiful endgame, as well as got some usable ideas for your own attacks or defenses. Thank you for listening. So long until next week.